Alright guys, welcome back. So today we're talking about photo bashing, and we had talked about this a couple of times in principle and in theory throughout the semester, but as promised in my last email, I want to kind of get into the creation of that, what photo bashing is, a little bit of a how-to. There's different ways to do it, different avenues of creation, so it's not all the same thing all the time. And the neat thing about photo bashing also is that it gets us into a slight tangent into the very beginnings of photo retouching and manipulation. More about that certainly later as well. So today's topic actually has different stages and steps, as all things in the world of artwork do. And as an instruction course and as a teacher of illustration, I want to kind of get into the theory of it as well as the physical practice of doing that. So to kind of jump into it right from the very beginning, what you see on the screen behind me here, as soon as I minimize this window, is the beginning stages of what we talk about with photo bashing. But before I get too far into it, I want to kind of begin through what it is, how it's used, and what you can and can't do with it. So the first topic here is photo bashing at its core, and this is usually what I consider to be more like concept development. So these are all things that I've pulled directly off of the internet. I did not create any of these things, so just keep that in mind. But what I'd like to do with these is kind of walk through them and just kind of show you the different uses of photo bashing. I'm not saying these are all good examples or bad examples, these are just simply examples. What photo bashing is usually used for is a shortcut to getting to an end effect. Photo bashing, simply even by its name, it's almost like you're just sort of bashing something together or just smashing it to get it done and out the door. Photo bashing at its core is a technique of very, very loose retouching or very, very loose conceptual illustration or narrative building. It is not necessarily intended to be the final product. Certainly there are examples of that where it goes all the way to final and it looks like an amazing piece of artwork that could be used in prints for any number of reasons, and we'll see a couple examples of that soon. But photo bashing is usually a way of trying to convey an idea from one person to another, usually on the same team, as a way to kind of get an idea promoted. You can kind of think of it as like glorified thumbnails. They're built. A good example of this would be if you are a director for anything from advertising to a movie director or a video game art director, anyone who's trying to promote an idea, and they say, I would like you, creative team, to build an idea that fits this narrative I just gave you. And the creative team, you in this example, rather than spending countless hours drawing and thumbnailing and painting and rendering and 3D developing whatever, a whole scene, you would just bash something together, take it back to the art director and say, is this what you're looking for? Art director would say yes or no, and then based on that you'd go back and you would complete it. Either that would mean you would take what you've just done and like really amp it up and finish it, or use that as like a glorified thumbnail and kind of build the whole thing the way you normally would. The example on the screen right now sort of fits that feeling. So this is, who knows what this is for. This could have been either for just someone's pet project or maybe even a scene from a Jurassic Park movie. I'm just sort of making it up. As you look at this scene, you can see that the stuff in here, it fits in a narrative sense, but illustratively speaking, in terms of palette, in terms of the general perspective, there are things that work and don't work. Clearly they're going for scale here with these enormous mushrooms and huge leaves and this dangling skull as it hangs or falls from the sky, or the treetop canopies here. So this doesn't feel like it was color corrected. This is way too warm, these are too cold, everything in here feels like it's grabbing sunlight that doesn't actually exist in the scene. Everything in here feels like it was bashed together, here's what's really cool about stuff like this, though, is that if you were using this as a way to kind of begin your drawing, now you have a lot of the creative work has been done, because now you know where everyone's going to be positioned, you've got their angles, you've got their perspective in a loose sense, and all of the color information is incorrect. The size and placement might be what you're looking for, so you can take this now to kind of begin. Photoshop makes this building technique very easy, because as I'm sure you've all used layers and the transformation tools for scale and spin and rotation, you can make things like this happen very quickly without really having to do much work at all, as long as you've got the time to very loosely clip things out. Speaking of clipping things out, look at this leaf. you can see there's still some like white residual edges here where the artist probably just either used the magic wand tool or the very quick magnetic selection tool to kind of go around these things and pull them out. These are not photo finessed. They're not ready to be printed and published as if they're perfect. They're kind of just bashed in there. So more examples of that as I kind of go through there. Here's some more. And rather than just building out entire scenes, which incidentally, building scenes like this one is a really great way to use photo bashing, we can also use it to kind of create artwork of conceptual characters and creatures and anything that might fall into the biological realm as well. This is clearly bashed together. You can see again the color information is slightly wrong. The anatomy it's okay, but you're starting to get into weird moments where even though this has photorealistic elements on it, like these scoots and scales and other various pieces here, there's just something wrong about the color is too perfect all the way through. There's very little change of tonality and of hue, which is strange for an outdoor living thing. And on top of that, things are an in-between too cartoony and too realistic. And that's sort of that uncanny valley area where things are like, you can tell they're wrong because something about it stands off as being unnatural or strange. And in this case, it's probably as much to do with the color as it is anything else. You got little bits of snake in here, you've got little bits of some sort of a mammal-like build in here. So it's a fun way to kind of create an idea, but we're not really going for published, finished feeling here. This is just getting the ball started, and that's where photo bashing really comes in really handy. So more examples sort of like this, taking simple photo reference and then using either a combination of cut and paste photographs to kind of like build things in, like these wings may have been done, or to paint over top of it. Photo bashing is usually a combination of just either your paintbrush and clipped photographs. And so building stuff like this can be made a lot easier. And simply images like this one, which are really kind of bashed together using different geological features. And this one probably is starting to get more into finished, where I don't know if there's enough quality in here to call this a cinematic matte painting or background, but it's definitely very close to that. And what you have in here is some pretty consistent colorization all the way through. This feels like you're starting to get to like the borderlands of Mordor or something in the Tolkien universe. But a lot of this is starting to feel more buttoned up. You can tell this has been photo bashed because some of the geological features aren't really consistent. Like you got like this peat graph, almost like a volcanic feeling down here. You got these large spikes in here that feel like they're almost made out of granite. There's a different feeling to the morphology or the geology of the scene, but definitely believable enough that if this were seen as a background element to something, you probably wouldn't question it or care too much about it because it fits the mood more than the geological needs. But again, we'll get into more of those details soon. And here's a quick shot of how something like that may have been built. This is not the exact one-to-one, but you can see how you would take different pieces from different scenes, and then you can desaturate the colors, you can level out the contrasts between the dark and the light, and then you can also add and subtract colors as needed to kind of homogenize different elements from different parts of the world. This could be anything from the Alaskan snowscapes to someplace in the Norwegian countries all the way to Hawaii. You got different geological features in here that don't belong anywhere near each other, and then based on your sky information, once you're happy with the way the sky coloration looks, then so too all of your materials inside that scene need to be adjusted to match that same color and tonality, which is more or less what this artist did for his piece. Same general idea, take a bunch of things that don't belong together, find out how they work, soft erase out areas like this that maybe you can allow the ground that's existing here below to kind of blend into this shape, and then so too you would do that back and down in here where these pieces kind of have hard edges, and get rid of all of this, and you can start making it look more like that. So we're going to get into scenes like this too pretty soon. And then there's also the very simple idea of using just photo bashing in a more thumbnail illustrative sense, where you're not really bringing in very many photographic elements. This tree trunk back here might be the actual only photograph, and the rest of this was just using sampled color from this existing piece of fallen timber, and then they were able to kind of illustrate out all the rest of this. You can kind of tell this has been illustrated because this piece, this fallen tree trunk back here, has got the most amount of detail to it in the striations between the bark and the different light and dark crevices that are in here. And then when they get into the illustrative creator pieces in here, this doesn't seem to have or share the same level of detail. The color information is accurate, but you can tell I didn't really spend as much time carving out individual planks of bark or what have you in here. There's a lot of branches, but that kind of thing is a lot easier to build than figuring out the tonality of something that's more texture heavy like this piece back here. So the artist used this piece of wood, I am assuming, or fallen tree, as like the beginning for color and mood and feel. And then from that, they just color sampled out their elements to kind of build in the rest of the scene. So there's different ways to do photo bashing, and this is really more of what I consider to be like your very beginning core concept developments. All these examples around just taking things together, smashing them together as quickly as you can, and then finding a truth, a direction that you want to go in order to kind of act as the underlying artwork for your final creation. This itself would not be the final. It would just be bashing things together to act as your thumbnail, and you would use something like this instead of pencil or ink drawing thumbnails. You would just bash them together using clipped art and find things you found online, etc., etc. More about found online in just a moment. The next version of photo bashing gets a little bit more serious, and this one is one that I like to call the stretching your imagination version of photo bashing. Photo bashing's other hidden truth or hidden magic is that sometimes, if not all the time, when you're using photo bashing as an art form, you can use it as ways to really, really open up what you would normally not be able to imagine or draw, if that makes any sense. One of the biggest problems that illustrators have, especially conceptual illustrators whose job it is to come up with new things and invent new directions and new looks and new props and character designs and things that are really more about bringing science fiction or fantasy to life, and sometimes more often that means using your imagination to its fullest. And we've all had creative block. We've all looked at a blank piece of paper for hours on end, having no idea where we want to go or how to get there. And in years past, you would simply go through your reference files or your inspirations or even your Pinterest folders and try to find things, that directions that you wanted to go in, maybe to draw out a new creature, a new character, a new uniform, and just, whatever you might want to do. Where photo bashing can come in really handy is if you found a prop, in this case a very science fiction, cyberpunky kind of a prop, and that could be anything from like a traditional gun or a widget like these canisters for a gas mask, or maybe like a CB radio or whatever, something that has that techie feel that you're already interested in for the mood of your piece, and then taking that element or elements related to it and just twisting them and manipulating them and using pieces of them in order to create the scene. Everything you see in a shot like this one, for the most part, was created simply by taking photographs either in existence or their own custom photographs, and then cutting those things out and just placing them or pasting them into the scene and building the scene up. So almost all of the things in here, theoretically, could be built just simply by taking one thing and then morphing it and stretching it and turning it around and using only one piece of it. And I'll show you what that looks like also in just a moment. Another example that might work like that would be something of the more organic. So this artist used this base photograph of a muscle man to kind of work as his orc or as his barbarian creature, and then you can see from these different samples that he's pulled out where those things sort of took over and went over into this image. So obviously this is your core foundation, the architecture of the design, and then using things like the wrinklage of the heavy folds of the skin for the trunk of an elephant, or hair, which is probably used down here underneath the helmet. This helmet was only used in pieces in various places, like along the very top of this existing helmet. The horns were probably used right here, and then of course you got this draped fabric, which was used right here. This texture was superimposed over top of that. You kind of see like these horizontal lines are showing up right here along the midsection of that fabric, and then this was all erased out. You kind of see that as they were just using the eraser. Looking now, I'm not sure where this may have come in. That may have just been more of an inspiration for the different tones. Ah, there it is. Okay, so we're using that very softly, has been overlaid into the skin here, so that was probably set as its own layer, and then used as like overlay or screen or multiply and then erased away. So all that vein quality you see is what's happening inside of the skin right here. And then these little studs and little leather belts and all that, those things are all added on. So the idea of photo bashing in this sense is taking multiple pieces from existing other world reference points and then just smashing or bashing them into your overall scene. Things like this, where the work goes, is that perhaps you don't have the time or the interest or the creative faculty to create an actual pose or character or morphology all on your own, so you take an existing reference point and then you just start finding reference that you're interested in to kind of achieve your ultimate goal, slicing that stuff out and then bashing it onto your ultimate architecture, in this case this particular figure. This kind of thing takes work in a different way. You may not be spending 5 to 10 hours drawing and painting a figure, but instead you might be taking 5 to 10 hours finding all the things you need and then carefully curating them to find exactly what you want and where you're going to use it. And maybe you don't like this fold after all, and you gotta go find something different. So you can get creative quicker, but a lot of that lost drawing time will be taken over instead by research and reference gathering time. And then, of course, going through the physical stages of clipping things out and, orienting them and finding where things are going to fit. So, like, the shoulder piece is what's obviously being used over here. So, trying to find the right things for the right places. And since you're dealing with photographs cannot be 3D manipulated. I can't take this plate and then see what it looks like from the other side. Obviously, you're stuck with whatever you've got. So this perspective, this angle, and for some degrees, the rotational degree of this is really set in stone. I can take this and rotate it 90 degrees, for example, but I can't like come toward me on the Z or Y axis, if that makes any sense. It's stuck in this particular, format. So using that can be tricky. This man has been photographed at a traditional standing height, as if a person of approximately 6 foot were looking at him, from a standing position. But if I needed to see this guy from, a bird's eye view, I can't take this image and rotate it in any way that's going to look like it makes any kind of sense. So therefore, all the imagery that I find needs to share that same 6 foot standing perspective in order for it to have the same visual cues, the same light and shadow cues, the same orientation cues, all of that. So that's where photo bashing can become tricky. A person like this uses a combination of two different things. If you look closely enough, you can see that there is some line work in here. To be honest, I can't tell if the line work came first or if this artist just traced over what he had built using photographic bashing. But if you look at a lot of this, there's like seat belts in here and these clips and logos and even these belts. These are all things that were very deliberately found online and then just kind of bashed together. And I think, if I'm guessing, what probably happened here is this artist found different photographs. You can see this belt is being used over and over. So here's one use of it. You can tell by the way these little belt loops are positioned. It's almost like fingerprints. It's going to be the same wherever it's being used. You can tell that no two photographs are identical in every sense. So the way these belt loops are being positioned, it's the same as what's over here. So I feel like this was the exact same piece, just used two different places. And then, anyway, so the artist used all these found elements, bashed this scene together, and then when he got done, probably looked at this and said, you know what, there's a lot of these raw edges that don't seem to make an awful lot of sense, so I'm just going to take my brush and on a separate layer, I'm just going to draw over all of the meeting points where all of my photos kind of butted up against each other. That way it kind of makes it look like both a drawing and as a way of kind of homogenizing and bringing together and unifying all the different photographic elements. Again, this may theoretically not make an awful lot of sense as I talk about it, but as I get into the next portion of this lecture/tutorial, you'll kind of see a better idea how all this makes sense, how it all fits together. So other examples of that might include this. So this artist I found online, I don't have the link, but if I find it, I'll try to bring it up and promote it to you. But you probably use this exact image and find him on YouTube. But he's got a really good photo bashing tutorial as well if you really want to get into the really specific measures of how to do this in this particular way. So this unit, whatever this thing is, was his base point. So he took this item and said, I'm going to make this really neat creature using this, or this helmet at least. And so you can see like where these orange nut and bolts items are at, and you can see how it's being used over here. And he took this piece and then stretched it and rotated it and made multiple copies of it and bent it and rotated it around and then added a lot of the stuff. So believe it or not, this is the main ingredient that was used in all of its various parts, simply by using the selection tools, the copy and paste and rotate and transform, and using all of that was able to build most of this. And of course there's other elements in here that were hand-drawn. There are other elements in here that were sampled from other photographs. But this was basically the primary ingredient, and then using that, he built most of this, particularly the cranium of that helmet structure. So it's ideas like this, and where this version of photoshopping, everything I've shown you in this portion of it, comes from, is that this artist probably, and I'm guessing, and I'm kind of making fun of them a little bit because I don't know them, but this artist probably doesn't have the creativity to be able to sit down and draw all of this stuff completely from their imagination. Maybe they do, that's not really the point. But if you, as an artist, don't really have the practice or the creative direction or perhaps the imagination, if I'm being raw about it, to come up with a really articulated thing like this completely from your own imagination from scratch, then that's where this version of photo bashing is very helpful, because you're not really being asked to do that. Instead, you're taking all of your detail, your texture, even your color information is taken from this primary core ingredient, and then you're using that to build all the rest of it. It's almost like the ingredient is dictating what you're going to create. You may have a loose idea. I want to build an exoskeleton, in this case, a science fiction-y piece, but I don't really know how to do that from my own imagination. So I'm going to grab things online that feel like they belong to that world of creative, and then extrapolating and extracting, and by cracking open and slicing and dicing that particular ingredient, I can then make that thing. And then you'll find that as you do that, your imagination is being guided by your ingredients more than your ingredients are submissive to your imagination, if that makes any sense. You're flipping it upside down, and that's really where concept artwork in this way works really, really well. Here's a piece that was done by a past student, Dieter Miller, from a couple of seasons ago, and what they did, as you can very easily tell, create a couple of helmets from the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And the way that this artist did this was they took different automobiles and sliced up pieces from it in order to create these helmets. Each one of these was actually created from different vehicles. I think both this one, the middle pink, and the left black, were both created from motorcycles. And I believe the one over here on the far right, the yellow one, was created using Lamborghini pieces. The windshields were used for the visors. And you can almost, if you look closely enough, this little yellow bracket right here and the arm that's attached to, that's basically the turn signals from the motorcycle stem or stalk on the back of the bike. These two were probably fender pieces, or the wind or the fins, spoilers on the back of the vehicles. You have down here along the side, these were the hoods or the coverings for the engine bays. They were just shrank and kind of mirrored. And the way this works is really neat, because you don't have to build the entire mask. You only have to build half of it. So in this case, just the left side. And then once you build just the one side, you can take everything you've just done, copy and paste it, flip it to the right, and then you basically create your mirror image. And that's the way a lot of this stuff is done. So basically, here's the seat of the vehicle or the motorcycle. This is probably the gas tank for the motorcycle as well. So those things were just taken, they were mirror flipped, and then pasted back down, and there you have it. You make something really neat. So these probably took a couple of hours each, but something like this, the artist did not just sit down, and think, well, I'm going to make all of these very specific shapes and facets. I'm not going to spend all my time trying to figure out exactly where each one of these little pinprick holes is going to go. That was already built into the source material, the ingredients he chose. So once he took this, if you look at this one section right here, this piece right here, the very top of the cranium, was probably the very top of the car. And then you just take the one piece, you copy it and paste it, and you flip it, and before you know it, now you get like the top of the head. So what's really cool about this technique of photo bashing is that you're allowing your imagination, almost like a Rorschach test. You're making things up as you see them in the ingredients that you've chosen. And we're going to do both of these examples, the organic build from my first set of examples, and then also this version as well, which is really more of the let the ingredient do the talking for you. I think that's the last one from this set. Yep. So then my last option, I think I went through all of them so far, is this one. So this is your high-end or corporate use retouching or photo bashing. So I'm calling this photo bashing, but that's not really fair. This is really more now photo manipulation and what the Detroit, southeastern Michigan area considers retouching. So on my really quick high horse here for a moment, retouching is one of the closest things to what I'm going to call is illustration that I've gotten to in the corporate world since graduation at CCS myself. And retouching, as I've mentioned a few times in class, is probably one of the strongest needs for this area. So New York, Chicago, Detroit, the Midwestern to East Coast regions, most of our creative needs over here fall into the world of advertising. And advertising can be especially automotive, but it can also be other products, and very, very product heavy, whether that be fashion and clothing, or things like iPhones and Samsung and the more handheld owner product type of world of retouching. But in all cases, advertising requires retouching. And when I say retouching, that's usually brings to mind like your 1980s and 1990s version of what retouching used to be, which is pimple removal and fixing tears and cracks in old photographs and getting rid of wrinkles and things like that, you know, smoothing out the skin. And while those things still count and are very relevant in the world of retouching, that's the kind of stuff that basically any noob with Photoshop can do. I can have, you know, any random 10-year-old with an hour or two can fix a photograph and get rid of tears and things. And yeah, they may have different qualities and skill to do that, but basically anyone can do that now. You don't need agencies to do that kind of work anymore like you used to, you know, 15, 20 years ago. So retouching in 2020 and beyond is really less about repairing things and more about building things completely from scratch. So we're talking about CG imaging, actually building things. And more often than not, a lot of agencies like Armstrong and White or Gecko Imaging or Core Group, these are places local here that have transitioned away from bread and butter stuff like thumbnail drawing and marker comps and, you know, storyboards and things that they used to do, and they've transitioned very heavily into 3D and building things more like this. So these particular set of images, I believe, came from Gecko Imaging a couple of years ago, and you'll see some examples here and what that looks like. And so a lot of these companies used to just take the CAD models right from the company. So in this case, Cadillac would give them the CAD model for the vehicle, which is dangerous for them because once the CAD model has been sent out, they basically have got access to, you know, the actual mold of the car, which theoretically could be reproduced. So a lot of companies don't like handing out their CAD data because that's pretty sensitive. So more often than not, they will hand over like a simple shell 3D model of that image, which can be manipulated and rotated in space. And then they'll send that over to a company like Core Group or like Gecko or Armstrong and White, and they'll be able to photo manipulate that in a three-dimensional space, and they'll be able to spin it and turn it and rotate it and color edit it and actually apply their materials and processes and textures to that the way any other 3D model can be built. And that way they can manipulate and light their model and then also build an environment to go with it, which is the entire purpose. But the other half, I'd say probably closer to 75 or 80% of true photo retouching is really where the company, Cadillac, says, here's an angle of the car that we really like. We're going to shoot this in a white screen infinity room where you don't have any background at all. We're just going to send over that vehicle with its white background to you, the agency or the individual retoucher, and then you need to just create the background that fits this particular perspective in this image, which is what this person has had to do. So I think I have the original. So here's the end result, and then here was the original shot. So in this case, it wasn't the infinity white background, but really more of a group of different individual photographs. You can see the primary one in the background here is the actual environment. So this element right here, this boom or this arm, is what you'll definitely see an awful lot of in the southeastern Michigan world of advertising and illustration and design. And this is basically where you have a hired actor who's playing the part of driver, is in the vehicle, and they're not really so much driving the car as just steering it. It's actually being hauled or pulled by this very sophisticated boom arm that's being towed basically by a tow truck. So they do this on purpose because that way they keep both a safe distance from the photographer who's on the boom truck and the vehicle that's being towed, so they can kind of control the normal distance and speed away from each other. Because if you can imagine trying to photograph a moving car, it's not quite as easy as it sounds. There's a lot of blur, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So it's very common that you would have a vehicle that is the subject of a photo shoot being pulled in this manner. But of course, when that happens, you get this huge obnoxious arm that certainly cannot be in the photograph. So some minor retouching has to happen there. That's definitely part one. But the second half of that is making sure that the rest of the image matches what the client is looking for. So let's just assume that the client has already seen 100 of these images, and they've chosen this one because they like the general feeling of the curve or how the car is positioned or the lighting or all of the above. But now the question becomes, well, this still has imperfections. Believe me, in the commercial world of photography, there's no such thing as take the photograph and job done. There's always going to be extensive retouching to be made, which is a whole different story that usually angers photographers, but that's not this course. So for this way, what had happened is they liked the angle, but there's probably a number of things they didn't like. They clearly did not like the way the wheel was positioned in the original, so they took a different photograph from a different different angle, and they shot and put that in here. So you can see there's the turn of the wheel. You can see that right here they liked the reflection probably of the front of this grille better. There's probably a lot of a hot spot on the original one, so there's a new corner to this vehicle front facade has been added in. Same also back here. So the back of the vehicle also has its own photograph. So basically we've got 3 different shots of the car being assembled as one. There's the primary that's got the boom arm attached to it. Then of course there's the front passenger side grille. There's the wheel on the driver's side. And then there's also the driver's side rear, which is also a different thing. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4 images being added together to make this one shot. And then of course there's also the background itself. I can only guess they did that because they wanted a little bit more room between the roll bar or the guard over here and the back of the car. You can see from this shot they're pretty close. Same here. So they probably want to put a little bit more of a safe distance. It is unusual to have the car kind of crossing over the yellow line like that, but they're definitely going for more of a drifting look. And then there you go. So when I take all of those things together, as I flip back and forth, you know, here's the original as I'd shown you, and here's all the elements that went into it. If I flip back and forth, you know, focus on a couple of different things here. You've got what's happening on the grille. So I flip to the original, that's been added but softened a little bit. And then also on the rear wheel here, they were able to add in that rear wheel, but they highlight the rims a little bit to kind of make those pop off a little bit more. There's the wheel again, which has that almost untouched. They didn't do an awful lot to that, but they definitely brought that into the overall vehicle. They got rid of that black shadow right there. So you can see there's a couple of things, and of course the most obvious one, they got rid of both the boom arm and the yellow line. My guess is they got rid of the yellow do not cross line because A, it's illegal to drift over that line, but second, because it definitely shows that the car is literally losing control and has skidded into oncoming traffic, which I don't think is a great advertising sensation for any platform, so they definitely needed to get rid of that. So between all those things, they give you this final image, and they even added in a little bit of this spin action here to kind of mask the fact that they probably had to do some very heavy duty augmentation to all of the ground work over here, and they added in a little bit more of the smoke as it kind of goes around the corner. So interesting shot. So very high drama, and a lot of color correcting also went into that because they got rid of that really extreme blown out high heavy light from above and then muted it down a little bit and kind of made it a little bit more high contrast. The traditional photo retouching effect. So the things I'm showing you right now are examples of how photo bashing works in a professional setting as well. They are taking images that are basically original and in many ways complete, and then they're bashing them in the sense that they are taking things out, adding things in. In this case, they're adding light, as you can see from the background over here. Oops. So this was really more of an almost overcast, kind of a boring gray day. And then because the way the image was shot, they then added in a lot of this light and the drama. They obviously flipped the car from red to black. They got rid of the boom arm. They even changed the way the logo looks. So this is also a very common thing where a car company, in this case Chevrolet, will say we're going to take some photographs of our vehicles, and oh, by the way, we really want to use black in the advertisement, but we don't actually have any of those trucks available right now because they're all off doing other things with their clients or other places. So we're just going to give you a red one and good luck. So that's very common. So that means that the ultimate retoucher slash developer needs to take what's available and then give the client what they're looking for, which, usually means extra work, but, it's stuff that all fits the bill. So there you go. So that's some really quick versions of photo bashing. This one also very simple. It kind of takes exactly what I was mentioning in the very beginning of this particular set of images, which is often the car companies will do this. They will give you a well-lit, well-photographed image, usually set against an infinity screen or a background that looks like it has no corners. And then it's up to you as the artist to then create an environment that matches the perspective, the mood, the lighting, the flavor overall of the image that either the client wants or has been supplied. So back a couple of versions ago, I had mentioned that when you were given a photograph, not a 3D model, you're stuck. You can't flip this. I can't raise the camera and show more of the hood. I can't rotate this and give us more of the wheel or less of the wheel or more of the back end of the car. I can't do anything with this. It is a photograph. It is locked in place. And with all things photo bashing or retouching or photo manipulation, the clients, as smart as they are, seem not to understand this. And very, very frustratingly often, you will get clients that will say, well, I'd like to see more of the other side of the car. And then your only response is, well, then you should have shown me more of the car. This is a photograph. I can't fix that. But of course, as illustrators and designers, our job is to give the client what they're looking for. So often that means you need to either be present and in control of the photograph session from the beginning and get every possible angle you think you're going to need to finish the job, or find very clever and creative ways to show whatever it is the client is looking for. But the short answer is, there is no push button option in Photoshop that says, show me more of the roof on this car. You can't manipulate a static photograph. So here's what we got. So the client said, well, here's a photograph. We like the dramatic in-your-face, low forced perspective angle of this image. So let's make an environment for this. So the core group or Gecko Imaging did exactly that. They took this and then they just added in all of this little extra flavor. So as you can see, they got this fairly boring background of looks like asphalt or a huge parking lot complete with yellow marking lines, and then you got your kind of sort of dramatic sundown kind of happening back here. It gives you a little bit of light, but as you can see from the original, they really amped that up. They really darkened and high contrast the concrete. It is the same concrete, because if you look at this, let's see, here's a little cluster of little white dots. And like with all photographs are like fingerprints. It's almost impossible to pixel perfect match one photograph to the next. So in that way, if you concentrate on just these little dots right here, and I flip back over to the other scene, you'll see now if I go from here to here, those little white dots are still there. So this is the same concrete. It just means they took this and they really upped the contrast. They probably took the levels and they really amped it up. So I'm surprised to see the yellow lines are still there. I thought they probably would have removed those, but there they are. So they're still there in the original. And even the background is sort of kind of mostly the same. If you look at this little cloud formation right here, this kind of like sideways V, if I go back to their shot, it's still there. So they are still using a lot of the original photography elements. They just really upped the contrast of them and played with the color balance. They also added a really strong vignette to both the horizon and the outer edges, because that way they were able to focus in your attention onto the center piece. They added in, back and forth, they added in the really strong shadows right here because they amped up the sundown effect over here. So that really strong light created a need to add shadows. And they also added the reflection, which is interesting because if you think about this, there is literally no way you're going to see this much light on the front of the car to even see that much detail, let alone create that level of high shine and sheen and reflectivity because the light is over here. By all stretches, you should see, if anything, a strong rim light around this car, and the whole front of it should be almost near black because the light is very, very strong. It's in your face, and it's behind the subject. So this lighting situation makes zero sense. It is impossible unless you have a very, very strong light faced from where we're sitting at the front of the car. Not to mention you've got the lights of the car itself have been turned on to high beams, so you got even more light in your face. You would never see this much detail, but that's the power of drama and artistic license. You're not being asked to sell a photographic scene, you're being asked to sell a moment. And that's, in this case, where photo bashing comes in handy in the retouching sense. So I've taken you through several different sets of different kinds of photo bashing. The first one was more concept development, where you just take things and bash them together for the sense of just trying to make a scene that you don't really have the time or interest in inventing for yourself, and then using that as the foundations in which to draw and create your own thing. Or you might use it as a way to actually invent something that you physically don't think you got the creative chops to do completely from scratch on your own. Something like this feels like it was very artistically labored over, when in truth it may have only taken this artist, an hour or two of just finding the right things and bashing them all together. So there's that reality. And the third and final professional of all professional, most realistic version of this is when you take retouching to its professional core and taking those elements and then bashing them together in this sense to create one final composite, as we saw here, and then using that in the sense that most photo retoucher slash creative imaging people do in certainly the campaign commercial worlds of advertising and product development. So those are the three main pieces that I would walk you through. So I'm going to stop right there, and then I'm going to take up this next video showing you step one on how to create something that looks a little bit more like this, or I should say probably a little bit closer to this. And then we'll move on in the next video after that into creating something that looks more like one of these. So here we go. So thank you very much for your time up till right now. Thanks for walking through the theory with me, and now we'll kind of get into the practice of it. So see you in the next one.